I know that the cross was not a defeat, but a victory. And yet I still have my own version of what have you done for me lately when it comes to Jesus. And mine has nothing to do with Palm Sunday. Mine is connected to Easter itself. You see, Easter is my grand day. Easter is my big day for rejoicing, for shouting, for singing. Jesus Christ is risen today, hallelujah. Christ is risen, shout Hosanna. But when the celebration winds down, when the Easter lilies are wilted and turned brown, and Jesus looks at me and says, "Take up your cross and follow me," well, then the cross looks a little less like victory to me. Then I'm inclined to want to go back to the way things always are. Oh, I would never say crucify him. I have much gentler, much subtler ways of turning away from Jesus, of saying, "No thanks, Jesus. Not right now, Jesus. I'm too busy, Jesus." You know, I've never been one to quote poems in my sermons. I think I heard that so much growing up that I soured on it. But as I was working on this particular sermon, a memory of an old poem bubbled up, a poem I'd heard in childhood. From my vague recollection, I think my father read it to me, although I can't be sure. What little I remembered was it was about Jesus coming to the modern world and not being abused or crucified, but mostly being ignored. And I thought I could recall the last line, "and mourn for Calvary." Now, fortunately, thanks to the internet and to Google, that was enough to find it. It turned out I didn't remember the last line exactly correctly, but I was close enough. The poem was written by a British Anglican priest who had served as a chaplain in World War I. And when he had returned to his church work after the war, he had become disillusioned with British society, and especially with the way it had, in his view, not cared for the poor. And it was out of that experience that he wrote this poem I remembered that spoke of how the world had improved since the days of Jesus. And I'm going to read it to you. It says, "When Jesus came to Golgotha, they hanged him on a tree. They drave great nails through hands and feet and made a Calvary. They crowned him with a crown of thorns. Red were his wounds and deep. For those were crude and cruel days, and human flesh was cheap. When Jesus came to Birmingham, they simply passed him by. They never hurt a hair of him. They only let him die. For men had grown more tender, and they would not give him pain. They only just passed down the street and left him in the rain. Still Jesus cried, 'Forgive them, for they know not what they do.' And still it rained, the wintry rain that drenched him through and through. The crowds went home and left the streets without a soul to see. And Jesus crouched against the wall and cried for Calvary." You know, when you consider the way the crowds in Jerusalem turned against Jesus, when you think of how easily I turn away from him, it is startling, perhaps amazing, that Jesus never turned aside from his call, never turned away from the cross. And there, in the midst of my own failings, my own turning away, there as I encounter once more Jesus at the cross, I encounter once more the depths of God's love for me and for you. Thanks be to God.